On behalf of the Archives and History Committee of First Baptist Church of LaGrange, I'd like to welcome Joe Fagundes, a veteran of the Vietnam War and a member of our church. Joe, glad to have you with us today.
Thank you for having me.
And we're going to talk a little bit about your background and how you got to being in the military during the Vietnam War. But knowing personally that you grew up in Southern California, it'd be interesting to those that see this video, and I'm sure members of your family and friends, to tell us how you got from out there to here.
Well, Julian, I was, as you know, I was a pilot for the last 52 years, actually 53, but I started out loading sulfur on the crop dusters because a World War II pilot gave me a ride in a Stearman in this dairy farm that I was raised at. And I got caught on fire about flying. So I did a little flying in high school. When I graduated from high school, I went to a junior college, College of Sequoias, in the great San Joaquin Valley of California, the breadbasket of America. And of course, that's where I was raised. And anyway, crop dusted there, which was important to farming, and was obviously very interested in aviation. And when I graduated from junior college, I looked around. There were no wars on. It was a peacetime situation, but I wanted to do military flying. So the Navy was taking aviation cadets with 2 years of college, a degree with 2 years of college. So I enlisted, and I went into the United States Navy at Naval Air Station, Oakland, California. And from there, I went in a midnight rocket piston airplane. Took us 8 hours to go across country to Naval Air Station, Pensacola. I got off the airplane at Pensacola. First time I'd been on a transport type airplane, which was a real experience. National Airlines was flying into Pensacola then. And on that airplane was a Marine enlisted man who at that time there were a lot of military people that had applied for pilot training that kind of evidently rose up to the top, and he was a sergeant in the Marine Corps, straight from Parris Island. And he helped me with the adventure of checking into the United States Navy by telling me that the river between Pensacola and Naval Air Station Pensacola was full of alligators, and if I didn't behave, they'd throw me into the alligators. He got my attention immediately. That's how I got there, Julian.
Well, it's very interesting, and that you chose this avenue to further your career in flying. Tell us a little bit about your experiences in the cadet program and what it led to as far as your serving in the Navy.
Well, the cadet program at that time was a very tough program. As you well know, you were an AOC as a naval officer yourself, but we competed. I was a business major in college, but I loved flying. But these folks were coming from Georgia Tech, that great trade school up in Atlanta, had a lot of pilot trainees because it was engineering. You had to have a lot of engineering background to compete. So as a cadet, we competed with all these fellas from MIT and Georgia Tech, Case University in Ohio. Were known to have great aerodynamic programs and all that. So we were not commissioned at the end of the 6 weeks of basic. We remained as cadets until we earned our wings. When we earned our wings, we got a commission. In the process of going through pilot training, we started out in prop airplanes and then went into advanced prop airplanes and in jets. And in my case, I ended up in helicopters by choice. I met a girl from Brewton, Alabama, and luckily I married her, and she put up with me through my aviation career. We've been married 52 years. So the most important part of my life as far as an event was when I met my wife Betty during pilot training. And with our background in the Navy, when it was time for me to make a career decision, I went with Delta Airlines, which I spent 33 years with. But Betty said she didn't care where she lived as long as it was south of the Mason-Dixon line and east of the Mississippi River. And that's how we ended up in LaGrange, Georgia.
You told that just like Betty told you to.
Well, I cut it short.
Well, now tell me a little bit more about your service in the Navy after you finished. Oh, by the way, how long did flight training take before you got your wings?
18 months is what it takes. You have a combination of academics. The first 6 months, being a crop duster pilot, I had a white scarf around my neck, and I thought, well, when I got to Pensacola, they were going to take me and put me in an airplane, and we were going to go flying. Boy, was I surprised. I had a Marine sergeant that was out of Parris Island with a little Smokey the fireman hat, and he was in my face for 6 months. And with a last name like mine, I was certainly a star for that sergeant. So during this very, very competitive 18 months, there was 30 people that were in my class. There were AOCs, and you remember that, AOC's Aviation Officer Candidate, and they were Naval Academy graduates that got orders for flight training. So all of us were in these classes, except for the Naval Academy guys. They lived in a BOQ. The rest of us...
They were already officers.
Yeah, they were already officers because they were commissioned when they graduated. But anyway, the AOCs got their commission at the end of I think it was 6 months. Yeah, it was 6 months. And they were commissioned, but we were still cadets. And we were about the highest, they called us a cadet, but we were somewhere between a Navy chief and a commissioned officer, which was no man's land. Nobody wanted to be a cadet because you always had this Marine in your face. So you got an hour's sleep, 2 hours sleep, first 6 months you were in the Navy. The rest of the time you were braced against the wall or in academics. You finally got to an airplane, and they graded us on a curve, and those people that have gone to technical schools or any major college know that some professors like to grade on a curve. Very competitive. And so you really, really had to work hard during the academics just to stay afloat with these people from MIT and Tech and so on. But anyway, we were waiting for those of us that had pilot training before, waiting to get to those airplanes because we were going to get even with these guys. Well, that curve was going to be on our side because we could fly. So they had to catch up with us to the flying skills.
So once you got to that point, did you find the going a lot better?
Yeah, it was quite a bit better. And as we moved through the different stages and got more advanced through formation flying, gunnery, and then it came time to carrier qualify, and that divided the men from the boys. There are a lot of people, AOCs, the Navy or the Naval Academy grads, a lot of people that applied and had gone through so much to get to the 14th or 15th month, and it was time to carrier qualify, dropped on request. They called it a DOR. So out of the 30 in my class that started it, 4 of us got our aviation wings.
I can understand how that would be the cutting point because that's an awesome thing to land an aircraft on a carrier. in either? I mean, some people just don't have that capability.
Yeah, well, it was an event. Let me tell you that.
Easy for you.
That was a real event because the day that it happened, we were at Softly Field, which was just outside of Pensacola. And we've been training there on what we call Field Carrier Landing Practice, FCLPs. And they had a ship drawn on a runway, and we were practicing carrier landings. And all of us, and me included, were really thrilled that we're getting close to the end because I was going to get commissioned in my wings. Pretty well assured. Once you become carrier qualified, you had passed the program. Then you went to advanced training and whatever you're going to do in the fleet. But that was a huge day when I went out and saddled up in a T-28 and the instructor was flying chase. We did a four-plane and we flew formation out to the USS Antietam, which was a carrier qualifying carrier in the Gulf of Mexico then for all the training groups. And it was a beautiful day. I'll never forget it. It was in September. No, it was in June. And the weather was good, no thunderstorms around. Perfectly beautiful day at the beach. And we took off and we headed out towards water. And we flew for 45 minutes out, straight out into the Gulf. And I'm flying formation with the instructor. The instructor was leading us, and all of us had our eyes on him. We're flying formation, and we got out the ship. We never saw the ship. And of course, the instructor did, but we didn't because we're flying on him. And we come around, we did our break, and you've probably seen it in the World War II movies, the airplanes braking and getting in line to come around to land. And I'm following the airplane in front of me. He turns the base leg, and it comes time for me to turn the base leg, and I look, and I don't see the ship. All I could see was the wake of it. And I'm going, I missed the ship. I'm going to end up landing in the water. And finally kept turning, and then there was the ship. It was about as big as a matchbox. Yeah. And, you know, your blood starts pumping, and very exciting. You have to open up the canopy. And for those of us who were cadets, we had our solo bars that was given to us when we soloed, 12 months before. And we would put, it was a tradition that we would put the solo bar, when we saw the ship, we'd put the solo bar in our teeth, okay? And we would hold on to it and go in and take the landing on the ship and take the first trap. We called it a trap. Caught the wire, of course stopped us in 75, 100 feet, which was tremendous deceleration. And the water is going by. And all these things are, you have these people directing you, and all this noise is going on, and you're just overwhelmed. And next thing you know, they're shooting you off the bow. And the tradition was when you went off the bow of the ship on that first cat shot, you'd spit your solo bar over the side because now you're a double bar cadet. That was a big day. It really was.
I've often wondered, before you ever make that first approach for a carrier landing, had you done that before as part of your training with your instructor landing?
No.
This was your first landing on a carrier.
Mm-hmm. You practiced it back at Softly Field on that drawing of a ship, and they did have some arresting gear that they had on the ground, and you did, practice getting that number 3 wire. They had 4 wires, and the ideal wire to catch was number 3. And so they did have that simulated on the ground. But the first time you went aboard the ship, you were the guy.
Well, once you made this qualification, you still hadn't gotten your commission yet,
Not yet.
and you're getting it pretty soon.
We got to move into the bachelor officers' quarters, though.
Okay.
Our commissioning date was based on when we carrier qualified, okay, for pay purposes. So we're going to get a pay raise. And I was going to get married
like
because
going-
I could not be married and be a cadet, okay? That was part of the program. You had to be a commissioned officer to be, and an aviator before, in that program.
It's like
before
going
you
from
could
the
get married.
darkness into the light.
That's right.
Well, now, after you got your commission, is that when you got married?
Exactly. I did. That's when Bruton is where my wife was from, Bruton, Alabama, and had an auxiliary field that the Navy used. We used to go over there and practice landings at Bruton, and I had an airplane. We were doing formation flying over Bruton at about 10,000 feet, and the engine blew up on the airplane I was flying. And I had to make an emergency landing, and when I looked down, there was airfield, and it was Bruton. So I spiraled down and made a dead stick landing into Bruton and brought the airplane to a stop. And I thank God for letting me live one more time. And got out of the airplane, and so we had the weekend off. And my roommate and I said, we're going to go back up to Bruton because it saved my skin having that airport down below us. And we pulled into a Dairy Queen, and there was this pretty little blonde girl behind a 55 Plymouth and at a Dairy Queen. And had a milkshake there, and there was my wife, my future wife. That's how I met her, because I made an emergency landing at the airport where she lived.
Had it not been for that emergency landing, you probably never would have met her.
That's correct. Fate is the hunter. I don't know if you remember that book.
Oh, yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
So after that, you got your commission, and then tell us about where you went after that. And
Well, Betty and I got married the day after I got my wings, and we headed out to my first duty station, which was in San Diego, Helicopter Combat Support Squadron 1. And we went out San Diego, Imperial Beach. Now you got to remember, Betty was from Alabama and was just getting ready to go in college. She was 18 years old. I was 21. We were in a Volkswagen driving to California. When we were going through Texas on the way to California, she started crying because we ran out of pine trees. Then she was looking for a river. And we went over the Pecos River, and I said, we'll stop and we'll go down and look at the water. And there was no water. But anyway, Imperial Beach, and I did my first Pacific. I was there a month, and I got orders immediately to go to sea. And I went on the USS Constellation, which was the first big supercarrier that was supposed to have nuclear reactors. And there was no funding, and it had normal power for carriers on there, but steam powered. But anyway, we went on a showboat cruise where the Russian bombers, Badgers, were flying over us and trying to intercept us out in the Pacific, and we went through that little exercise. When the Russian Bear flies over the carrier deck at about 100 feet, that gets your attention.
what year was this?
This was in 1962.
Okay.
In November of, actually it was, I'm sorry, it was January of 1963.
Is that 50 years ago? Mm-hmm. That's what I thought. I had to do a quick calculation in my brain.
Yeah.
And from there, I'm trying to get you eventually. I know you went to Vietnam. And
Well, I went back to the squadron. We did that cruise, and I became one of the senior test pilots in the squadron, and I did a lot of the maintenance testing of helicopters, but I also kept my fixed wing. qualifications in a T-33. When we were in QB Point, Philippines, I'd go check out a fixed-wing airplane at QB Point. When we pulled in to shore for R&R or whatever it is, my R&R was to go out and fly fixed-wing airplanes to keep my proficiency up. So we had a lot of fun with that. Corregidor, the Philippines, or the QB Point was about 75 miles from Clark Air Force Base. The approach into Clark Air Force Base goes over the island of Corregidor. And during World War II, there were some very famous battles, air battles, over Corregidor. And so me and another guy in a fighter squadron, I'd check out my jet, he'd check out his, or he'd have his jet, and we'd go over to Clark because they had a nice bachelor officers' quarters there, and they had good food and all that. And anyway, we'd take our jets and we recreate the Battle of Corregidor out there, and unbeknownst to us, we were messing up the approach traffic for Clark Air Force Base. Here we were out there dogfighting over Corregidor. We were met with a blue pickup truck with the flags that's got base commander on it when we got to Clark. They said, "What were you guys doing out there?" So anyway, that's some of the excitement on that first one. The second cruise was on Hancock. This is 1965. I went with a detachment on the USS Hancock, which was a 27 Charlie carrier, smaller than a Constellation, but we started the war. We were in the Gulf of Tonkin, and the war in the North started there. And we were in my room, my stateroom, which was near the hangar bay. I was with the skipper of VF 154, who was a commander. I was a full lieutenant then. And we were playing AC-Deucey, that famous Navy game.
Oh, yeah.
You remember AC-Deucey?
Sure do.
And we were there at 2 o'clock in the morning. We couldn't sleep, so both of us were in my stateroom playing this AC-Deucey game. And the speakers went off. Now hear this. Now hear this. This is not a drill. Man your battle stations. And we looked at each other and said, "What? What is going on?" So we go to CIC, which was the ready rooms, and we go down there and they brief us. And they're loading napalm. And they're loading 500-pound shiny bombs on all the airplanes. And it was a chill that came through all of us because we've been practicing all these years. And then all of a sudden, this was a real thing. And, a lot of things go through your mind. The kids or the pilots that were in World War II in Japan, they had the same feeling we did. They're on these carriers. Or, when we left San Diego on the Hancock, and things were we were getting information that Vietnam was going to be something. There was a small police action at that point when we left on this cruise. But on the hangar bay, it was a tradition that all the pilots on the carrier would line up in a hangar bay. And there was 100 of us. And we knew from the first cruise, on the Constellation cruise that I was on, that 10 of us were not going to come back. Guaranteed. Okay? 10% of us were not going to come back from that cruise. Now we're going to war, and we knew that we're going to lose 10, probably, and probably some more. And that did happen. We lost 15 pilots on that cruise. 6 of them were prisoners of war in Vietnam. They ended up in a Hanoi Hilton. But, they were a tough lot. They were. And talking to them after they got back in my air show circuits, when I was flying air shows for the last 25 years, I got to meet some of my old shipmates. And we talked about stuff.
Once an aviator, always an aviator.
Always, that's right. It's like being a Marine. Once a Marine, always being a Marine.
I guess you could say it twice if you were a Marine aviator.
Yeah. That's true.
So anything else you want to tell us about your experiences in Vietnam?
Well, one of the most dramatic things, and your faith in God helped you get through this, but was when you had these young troops on the ground and they're asking for help and you can't help them because of politics. When the war started, that first 100 planes on Task Force 77 could have brought the Vietnam War to its knees. All we had to do was go into Hanoi and bomb the rice fields. Plugged up the port because the Russians were bringing the ammunition and support into Hanoi, into port, and all we had to do is close the port, okay? By not only bombing it, but mining the harbor, the whole entire harbor, and then knocking out the dikes that were the rice fields, because armies cannot march without food. And it would have been a 6-month endeavor, but it could have been done. And they wouldn't let us do it. They picked out our targets. And we had kids flying up the Red River. I'll never forget that. As a roommate of mine went up the Red River in his photoplane. He was a F-8 photoplane, taking pictures of so-called sites and getting shot up, coming back because he couldn't leave that path. He couldn't circumnavigate that path. He had to come back the same way because of political implications. So politics and the wars, and we even see it today, politics and war just don't really mix, in my opinion. And I feel for those kids on the ground that need the help, and we can't help them because of politics. And that's the unseen thing that's going on. And you see in today's news the Navy SEALs doing their thing, and they're being impeded a lot for what they're trained for. So it's not an interesting thing to know, but it's a thing that you don't like about war and what's going on.
Well, this is interesting that you should point this out, because I've heard many variations of the same thing over the years, so I know it exists.
Yes.
So how long were you in the Navy totally?
6.5 years. And it was time for my commanding officer wanted me to stay in the Navy. In fact, I was a USNR. Aviation cadets got a reserve commission. And I had put in my augmentation papers and got accepted as regular Navy. And so I became USN, which guaranteed you a career at that time. And so I was USN, and I had a friend came to work for Delta Airlines that had left the ship. And so I called Ken. When we got back from Vietnam, my wife was not real excited about staying in the Navy. And she's my hero because she had, you have to be a military wife to understand the psychic of hanging in there with this guy that's doing what he loves. I was flying airplanes, helicopters, shooting AR, they didn't have AR-15s then, but shooting machine guns and doing combat, okay? And that's what I was trained for, and that's what we did. And we loved it. I mean, we genuinely loved to fly, okay? Some of the stuff that we did flying was not particularly good, but it was part of warfare. But your wife was there, knowing that you might be one of those 10 or 15 that were not coming back. And she'd lived with that, with her babies, and stood alone. And, you know, when the rent was due, you know, she had to take care of all that. And the wives of all these soldiers nowadays, and sailors and Marines and Coast Guard people, their men are deployed, have to go through that. And they're real heroes. Those wives are. They're strong. They have to be strong to endure that. So, you know, my hat goes off to them.
This is interesting that you should point this out. That's really good.
The idea that I had a chance to go to work for Delta Airlines crossed my mind, because the last time I left, Betty was standing at the pier with our oldest son in her arms, and I was on that flight deck with the other 100 pilots, and we're pulling away from the pier. And I said, you know, this is really selfish of you to do this exciting thing, to fly. You know, it was dangerous. Everybody knows that it's dangerous. But it was something that you really loved to do, and to leave your wife and baby there to wait for you to come back. So that's when I started entertaining going with the airlines, and that happened. Betty said, you could go to work for any airline you want, as long as it's south of the Mason-Dixon line and east of the Mississippi River. So that's how we got here.
That's how you got with Delta.
That's correct.
And how long did you fly with Delta?
33 years.
Oh, that's a great experience, I know.
Yeah.
And I noticed on your shirt, Blue Angels Air Shows, 2005. Just touch on that a little bit.
Well, I campaigned for 25 years, a World War II trainer that made a lot of noise and put out a lot of smoke. And people that live here in LaGrange certainly were aware of that, because I'd fly around LaGrange and they said, we hear you coming. And I know that you experienced that, because I used to buzz your house when we go by. And I did that for 25 years. And as being a Navy supporter, I flew a lot of Blue Angel shows by invitation. In fact, I retired from the air show circuit 2 years ago. I'm a little old to be flying upside down close to the ground. So it was time to sell that airplane, which I did. And so how I got involved with the Blue Angels and the museum down in Pensacola was through those efforts, and became an honorary member, and was the warm-up act for the Blue Angels. When you go see a Blue Angels show, you always see a few aerobatic civilian acts ahead of it. Well, I did a civilian act in a World War II airplane. Most of the time I raced the jet truck. If you've ever been to a big 100,000 person air show, they had a truck with a jet engine on it that would run up and down a runway putting out smoke. And if you go to YouTube nowadays, you can pull up my name and you'll see on YouTube a video of me racing a jet truck down at Pensacola.
I got to do that.
And that's how I ended my aerobatic, so-called aerobatic career.
Well, this is all a very interesting interview. Anything else you want to touch on as far as Vietnam?
Well, I think it's a wonderful thing what the church is doing, and chronically, and the chronology of our World War II veterans, our Korean veterans, and those of us Vietnam, and of course Desert Storm, and probably coming up as the older folks as we're going away. But there was a price to pay by young men and women out of middle America, that would enter into the military to fight for their country. And they enlisted. They weren't drafted, they enlisted. Of course, the draft came along because they needed people to man the firearms, for instance, in numbers. But the majority were enlisted as volunteers. So they volunteered for their country and the lifestyle that we're used to. And so I think that's a big thing. That's one of the things. The other thing is that God has been good to me, in that I've done what I've really wanted to do. I've served my country. I've got a great family. I was married to the same woman for 52 years. And so, it's been good to us. And God has looked over a lot of us. A lot of us can share that story, that God has put His hand on our shoulder and protected us. And so I leave that with you, is that the hand of God has touched me.
That's wonderful. I think it's also a good time for me to insert my experience on my 50th anniversary. I was playing golf with some guys up in the mountains, people I didn't really know, and I mentioned that today was my 50th anniversary. And one of the guys said, "All to the same woman?" I said, "Yes."
Yes.
But Joe, I thank you for this interview, and I thank you for your service to your country in the Vietnam era. And I know you went through a lot of things that you haven't talked about here, because that's the way most people are that serve in these situations, where they see a lot of death and a lot of sadness. But you've had a wonderful career, and I know you're proud of it, and we're proud of you. And we thank you for serving your country and talking with us today.
Well, thank you, Julian. I thank you for your service.
I'd like to thank Paul Barnes for doing the technical work on making this video, and I'd also like to let everybody know that copies of this video will be here at our archives facility, and also in our church library, and also at the facility we have downtown on Main Street. Also, you'll get a copy of this also for you and your
Thank
family.
you.
So we thank you for coming today, and thank you for this wonderful interview, and may God bless you.
Thank you.